wise person once said, change your oil often and change it hot. So today we're going to do just that. Bring your Jeep to operating temperature and then park it somewhere level. Set your parking brake and give the exhaust system 20 or 30 minutes to cool down. While the exhaust is cooling, round up the following tools and supplies: 6 quarts of SAE 10W30 motor oil, an oil filter, an air filter, a ratchet and a torque wrench capable of accurately measuring 25 foot-pounds of torque, a 5/8 inch socket, a grease gun with NLGI No. 2 waterproof grease, and a container to catch and recycle the oil. Of course, you want to keep some paper towels handy. If you're sensitive to petroleum products, it might also be a good idea to get some gloves. Thin nitrile gloves work best. A medium-sized funnel where the bottom is about an inch wide will be useful to keep from pouring oil all over the engine. When it's time to clean up, I like to use a little bit of either brake cleaner or Simple Green. Once you've collected all your supplies, it's time to go ahead and drain the oil. So first you're going to want to find your oil pan. Here's your drain plug at the back of it, and you then position your pan so that the oil will not go all over your floor. Also, take a minute to ensure that the drain in the middle of the oil pan and the vent are also open. That way the oil doesn't overflow the receptacle. So once your oil receptacle is positioned correctly, we'll go ahead and undo the drain plug using a ratchet with a 5/8 inch driver. Once you get it started, you can take it out the rest of the way by hand. And there's a trick to this so that you don't get all messy. Once you get it loose, you're going to hold it like this and pull straight out and down. And if you do that, you can usually do it without getting much oil on your hand. We'll see if I can do it on camera. Just like that. And you won't even get a single drop of oil on your fingers. Now take a clean paper towel, and while the oil drains, go ahead and wipe off the drain plug. Get all of the old oil off, and then set that in a place where you won't easily kick it across the garage and lose it. As the oil comes out, just keep an eye on it for a few minutes just to make sure that there aren't any noticeable discolorations, there's no water in it, make sure there's no metal shavings or filings. If there are, that would be indicative of other problems. Looks like today we are all set, so we're just going to let that continue draining. When it's warm, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes to completely drain out, so if there's something else you can do in the meantime, which there is, that would be good. So while that drains, we're going to go ahead and use our grease gun to lubricate some of the steering and suspension components on the front axle. There are 7 points that we're going to clean and then lubricate using our grease gun. The first one is the driver's side steering knuckle, where it meets the tie rod end, right here. So we're going to go ahead and clean that off. The reason you always clean it off first is that you don't want to force any dirt along with the clean grease into the joint, because that would prematurely wear it out. So once the grease zerk is clean, and you can tell it's clean because it'll be shiny, we'll go ahead and use our grease gun to add some grease. So we're going to push our nozzle of our grease gun onto the grease zerk. You have to hold it in place and just give it one firm shot of grease. Squeeze the handle once, go ahead and remove it, and then take a clean paper towel and wipe the grease zerk off so it doesn't attract any extra dirt to the joint. The next place to lubricate is where the track bar meets the frame, and there's a tie rod in there that we need to lubricate. So we're going to go ahead and clean that off. Again, you can tell that the grease zerk is clean because it'll be shiny. And then we're going to give it one shot of grease. Then take a clean paper towel and wipe off the grease zerk so as not to attract any extra dirt. And good idea as well to wipe off the tip of the grease gun. Next, we have our grease zerk where the pitman arm meets the drag link. So go ahead and clean that off, and then we'll give it a shot of grease. Continuing left, the next place to lubricate is where the drag link meets the tie rod. So we'll clean that off. Next, we're going to grease the joint where the drag link meets the passenger side steering knuckle. So go ahead and clean this off and give it some grease. You'll also want to go ahead and lubricate the upper ball joints on both driver and passenger side. Once your oil pan is barely dripping, we can go ahead and replace the drain plug. Make sure it's cleaned off. And then wipe around it and reinstall it. Get it started first by hand. Now go ahead and use your torque wrench with your 5/8 inch driver set to 25 foot-pounds to tighten the oil pan drain plug. Now with all the front grease zerks lubricated and the oil drained out of the oil pan, the next step is to remove the oil filter. So here's our oil filter. Before we remove it, just make sure that the drain pan is centered underneath it. And once it is, just go ahead and twist counterclockwise. Hopefully whoever installed it didn't put it on too tight, or else you might need some sort of oil filter wrench. I did mine, so it's not too tight. It's a nice thing about doing an oil change yourself. You know it gets done right, every time. With the oil filter removed, go ahead and take a paper towel or a lint-free cloth, preferably, and wipe around the oil filter seal. Now it's time to install a new oil filter. We're going to use a Mopar factory oil filter, which for the 4-liter engine is part number M0-090. So remove it from the package. And then you see the rubber seal that goes around the perimeter. Make sure that's clean, and we're going to take just a couple drops of engine oil, clean engine oil, and lubricate that before we install the filter. Take a drop on your finger and just run it around the edge. And that thin film of oil will help provide an excellent seal so that there's no leakage from the new oil filter. Now we're going to reinstall our new oil filter now that we've lubricated the seal. So just thread it down the side of the engine. I'm right-handed, so I always tell people tighten it gently with your left hand. That way you don't over-tighten it. Oil filters have a tendency to get tighter the longer they stay on an engine rather than looser. After you've installed a new oil filter, it's time to remove the crankcase cap from the motor, and on it, it makes note that this is before you add engine oil, and that's the sign for check the owner's manual, and it recommends SAE 10W30. So as soon as you remove it, carefully so as not to knock any debris into the valve cover, clean around the edge, and then clean the seal on the crankcase cap. Set that aside. We're just going to put it here on our air filter housing, and then we're going to put our funnel here and add our engine oil. Now take your funnel and install it in the valve cover. We're going to go ahead and add our 6 quarts of motor oil. It's always a good idea at this point in time to keep a paper towel nearby, because if you don't pay attention, it's real easy to spill a lot of oil here. Incidentally, it's cheapest if you buy motor oil in bulk, just like anything else, so I'll get a 5-quart container and then 1 single quart. That'll be cheaper than buying 6 single quarts. Now you can remove your funnel and replace your crankcase cap, ensuring that you tighten it till it clicks. Once it clicks, it's in place to the correct torque. So once you've removed your funnel, go ahead and clean it out. And I like to keep it inside of a marked Ziploc bag that says engine oil only. That way there's no chance of any dust getting on the funnel, which could, during the next oil change, make its way inside the engine. That way the engine only gets clean engine oil. Now with the garage door open, we're going to go ahead and start the Jeep and make sure that it has full oil pressure. And once it does, we'll let the oil settle for about 5 or 10 minutes and then check the oil level to make sure we have the correct amount in the motor. Our oil pressure is good, so now we'll let the oil settle into the oil pan for about 10 minutes, and then we should be able to get an accurate reading on the oil dipstick. Now let's go ahead and pull the engine oil dipstick and make sure the oil level is correct. So when we're done, it should be approximately between the 2 lines. The lower one is the add mark, the upper one is the full mark, and there's approximately 1 quart of oil that one would add to bring it from the bottom to the top. So now let's reinstall that, and then we can accurately measure it. And it's right where it should be, right about 3/4 of the way to the full mark. So now we're done changing the oil. Next, let's change the air filter. To change the air filter, it's actually quite easy. All you have to do is undo these 2 tabs, this tab, and this tab, and there's one more on the back, located right here. So just pull out to release them. And I find it easier also if we remove this vent tube here. Do that by twisting and pulling. And all I have to do is lift up, and kind of slide it towards you and to your left to expose the air filter element. And just pull that out. So you can see, mine's due, it's dirty. So just set that aside. Take your new air filter out of the box. Before we actually install it though, there's one thing we want to do. We want to take a clean, lint-free rag and wipe around the edge so that there's no risk of any dust contaminating the air intake. So just carefully with a damp, I use a microfiber cloth, go around the edges and get all the dust out. Microfiber is nice because it doesn't have any lint. And they're pretty cheap. Also, go around and get the inside edge of the cover to the airbox. Then take your new air filter out of the packaging. Take a moment to inspect it and make sure that there's no damage. Especially make sure that there's no damage around the seal, around the outer edge. This one looks good, so we're going to go ahead and install that. So let's pull this to the side. These are called pleats, and the pleats face down. It should fit securely in the grooves of the lower part of the airbox. Then just replace the cover. Make sure it snaps squarely into place. Once it's in place, go ahead and lock your clips down. And don't forget to reinstall the tube here. That's your crankcase venting tube. Make sure that everything is secure. And you're now done replacing your air filter. You've now successfully replaced your air filter, your oil filter, and changed your engine oil and lubricated the front of your Jeep's chassis. Now you can take it for a drive.